Today's story is a strange one. It's not a murder, it's not a disappearance, nobody goes missing, but I genuinely think that this one is going to mess with you in a way you're not expecting. Now, if you like history's mysteries and life's disturbing discoveries, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications so you don't miss out on what's coming next. So pull up a chair, grab something to eat, and let's dig in. So let's go back to 1997. There's a man in a hospital in Switzerland. He's 48 years old, and he just had a stroke that hit the right side of his brain. And for a while there, it was looking really bad. But he pulls through. He recovers. But the crazy thing is, cognitively, he seems totally fine. He can talk, he can think, he remembers who he is, where he is, and what happened to him. It's all good. So his doctors are doing the standard post-stroke check-ins, right? They're running through their list, and at some point, somebody asked him a pretty simple, open-ended question. What's bothering you the most during your recovery? Now, keep in mind, this guy just survived a stroke. Days earlier, his life was in genuine danger. So you'd expect him to say something about the fear, or the uncertainty, or maybe even his family, his career, right? Something like that, but he didn't say any of that. He said, "The food's terrible." He told the medical staff completely and sincerely the thing that was actually bothering him during his recovery from a life-threatening brain event was the hospital food, and that it wasn't good enough. What he wanted, what he said he genuinely needed, was duck confit. Seriously. And he continues. He's telling the doctors about specific dishes, describing them in heavy detail, like a particular kind of hearty regional dinner, a specific preparation of meat, the way bread should taste, and how it sounds when you tear it. He's going on about these meals with the precision and this absolute longing that sounds like it's coming from somewhere deep within. And his doctors are just kind of staring at him, looking at each other like, "Sir, what happened to you?" But here's the thing. Before the stroke, this man had never talked about food like this. Not once, not in 48 years. The man is a political journalist. He ate whatever his wife made. Food was not a passion for him, and it really wasn't an interest. Food was just food. And now, it's the only thing he wanted to talk about. What was happening inside this man's brain, and what it would eventually tell us about the nature of identity itself, is honestly one of the strangest and most quietly disturbing stories in modern neuroscience. And it all boils down to a question that sounds simple, but it really isn't simple at all. Can your brain decide who you are without asking you first? Okay, so to understand what's happening to this guy, I want to tell you about who he was. So let's rewind. So this man is a Swiss writer, a well-respected political journalist, the kind of writer who spends his days knee-deep in policy and elections, about parliamentary procedure, the dense, unglamorous stuff about how a country actually runs. And he was good at it. This was his thing. This is who he was. If you met this guy at a party and asked, "So, what do you do?" he wouldn't hesitate to share, and everything about his life backed it up. The deadlines, the sources, the long hours, hammering out columns. That was his identity, fully formed, and there was no ambiguity about it. He had a wife, he had a routine, he had the kind of life that runs on its own momentum. You wake up, you go to the newsroom, you chase the story, you come home, his wife served him dinner, and he ate what she served. And now, I want to mention something here that's pretty interesting, so just keep it in the back of your head for now. Food was just maintenance to him. It fuel in the tank, right? The thing you did between the things that actually mattered. 48 years on this planet, and food never once risen above background noise. Just remember that. So after he eats, he goes to sleep, and he rinses and repeats. He didn't complain, he loved it. That's just what it looks like when a person has settled into who they are. No midlife crisis simmering in the background. He knew what got him out of bed. 48 years and the career he believed in. Life made perfect sense to him. But one day, amidst the routine, a blood vessel in the right side of his brain began to fail. He was brought to a hospital and treated efficiently, but the person who woke up on the other side of that looked the same, remembered the same things, sounded the same, but he wanted something he had never wanted before, and he wanted it badly. Now, as you can probably tell, the stroke itself isn't the real story here. Now, don't get me wrong, they're terrible, they're sudden, but they're understood. Doctors know what a stroke does, families know what recovery looks like, there's a playbook for it. But what happens during this man's recovery does not fit that playbook. At first, nobody was looking for anything unusual, and why would they, right? His recovery was normal. He was alive, he was lucid, the damage to his right hemisphere hadn't wiped out his language or his memory or his ability to hold a conversation. By the standards of what a stroke could do to a person, this guy got lucky. So the medical team is focused on the basics: physical rehab, monitoring for complications, just making sure everything's working the way it should. His doctors actually encouraged him to write in a journal during recovery. It's pretty standard advice. It helps with cognitive function, it gives the care team something to assess, and it gives the patient something to do when they're feeling powerless. And he's a journalist, so he writes. But what he's writing about isn't what you would expect. There wasn't anything in there about the fear of death, nothing about missing his work or worrying about what comes next. Instead, this man, this political journalist who ate whatever his wife put in front of him for 48 years, filled his recovery journal with stuff like this, and I quote, "And it is time for a real hearty dinner, e.g., a good sausage with hash browns or some spaghetti bolognese or risotto and a breaded cutlet nicely decorated, or a scallop of game and cream sauce with spätzle, a Swiss and southern German specialty. Always just eat and drink. What a connoisseur I am. And now I am dried up here, just like in the desert. Where's the next oasis with date trees and lamb roast or couscous and mint tea like the Moroccan way? Real fresh." This is a man in a hospital bed recovering from a stroke. His left side is partially paralyzed, and he's writing about a fantasy oasis in Morocco where someone serves him the perfect lamb roast. This is not a hungry person making a list of things they want to eat when they get out. This is something else entirely. This reads like a man who has discovered, or maybe has been seized by something that feels like the most important thing in his world right now. There's longing in it. There's poetry in it. There's an attention to detail and texture and craft that this man had never applied to food before. Not once in his 48 years. And the thing that really got the doctors was how open he was about it. When they asked him directly, like, what's been bothering you the most during your recovery, he said he found the hospital food awful, and that he felt perfectly healthy, and that he had nothing on his mind but, and I quote, "good, tasty food served in a nice restaurant." That's it. That is what's on his mind. Food. His wife noticed too. She talked to him and the conversation would just drift towards food. Every time. It was constant, and it was weirdly specific. He was talking about eating more. He wasn't hungrier than usual. He just wanted to be eating better, finer, with more intention and more craft. But nobody was panicking. No one called a specialist. I mean, what do you do with that, right? It's a stroke patient who wants better food. It sounds like a symptom, but to him, it was a preference. Except this isn't a preference. A preference is something that you'd carry before. A preference has roots. This had no roots. This came from nowhere. Well, more accurately, it came from the damaged tissue in the right side of his brain. Right, so he's home, he's healing up, and by medical standards, his recovery is actually a success story. Cognitively, he's sharp, he's functional, and after about 4 months, he's ready to go back to his job. His job's waiting for him, his political journalism position. The one that he held for years. It was kept open for him. The door was right there, and all he had to do was walk through it. But he didn't. He sat down at that desk one last time, same newsroom, same colleagues, and he just didn't care anymore. What felt urgent and alive and worth his time for him now was food. Not just eating it, writing about it, thinking about it, understanding it. So he leaves the political world behind, walks right past that open door, and becomes a food and restaurant columnist. And he was good at it. He wrote about his city, and I quote, "A few more words on dining out. In my city are about 20 Italian restaurants, whereof only 5 to 6 are really superb. where one can get great pasta, pizza, and vino. For more exotic pleasures, there are 3 Chinese, 1 Korean, and 1 Japanese place available. He threw himself into this with energy and focus that, from the outside, looked like a man who finally found his calling. But there's one detail from his early food writing that kind of stops you, because it's the paralysis on his left side. He could barely hold a fork properly, he couldn't cut his own food, and he wrote about it while he was still a patient at the hospital. And he writes, "Due to my paralysis, I can't hold a fork. I can only eat food, which needs no cutting. How nicely surprised I was when the good sausage was served already cut as ordered, together with the potatoes." Think about that. This man's left arm barely works, and he's dealing with real physical consequences of this stroke. And what he's writing about now, what excites him enough to put into words, isn't the difficulty of relearning how to use his body, it's the relief of being able to eat the sausage that he wanted, and all the food that excites him. Now, this is where the story could stop, and you'd have a pretty heartwarming narrative, right? Man survives near-death experience, reprioritizes his life, discovers new passions. You could put that in a magazine. My stroke taught me to slow down and savor the meal. It's a feel-good story with a happy ending, right? But his family saw something different. At first, they figured the food obsession was just part of this new job. Of course, he talks about food all the time. He's a food columnist now, and that makes sense. But slowly, they started to realize that food wasn't just his job. It was the only thing that engaged him, the only conversation that actually lit him up. His desires for meals at home got more precise, more exotic, and he stopped eating at home because he wanted to explore fine dining out in the world. He started leaving the house to dine out constantly. Food had become the main operating system for this man. And if it was just him, like this one guy, you could probably just write it off as a weird reaction to a health scare, a midlife reinvention. Maybe that people change, but it wasn't just him. In 1997, 2 neuroscientists, Marianne Regard and Theodore Landis, published a study. And the reason they published it was that they'd been noticing something that didn't have a name yet. They had screened 723 patients, 723 people with known or suspected single brain lesions, strokes, hemorrhages, tumors, the like. This kind of focal damage lets you study what specific brain regions actually do. And out of those 723 patients, they found that 36 who showed this very particular behavioral pattern. What these 36 patients showed was a new compulsive preoccupation with fine eating, gourmet food, quality ingredients, elaborate preparation. This kind of relationship with food looks like someone just became a really passionate foodie, except it appeared after brain damage and people who had never shown the slightest interest in food before. And the neuroscientists gave it a name: Gourmand syndrome. Now, the journalist was one of the 2 main case studies. The other was a 55-year-old businessman. Before his stroke, the guy's life revolved around tennis and business. He was athletic, tall, and he paid attention to his appearance. He cared about staying in shape. And if you'd asked him to choose between a fine dinner and a tennis match, he'd probably grab the racket without thinking twice. Food was fun, food was pleasant, but it wasn't the thing. And then one day, he had a hemorrhage in the right side of his brain. And when he came out of the other side, something shifted. 5 weeks after the stroke, his doctors asked him to write down his experiences as a patient. And to their astonishment, what he wrote was almost entirely about food. And I quote, "After I could stand on my feet again, I dreamt to go downtown and sit down in this well-known restaurant. There, I would get a beer, sausage, and potatoes. Slowly, my diet improved again, and thus did quality of life. The same day after discharge, my first trip brought me to that restaurant, and here I was ordering potatoes, salad, sausage, and a beer. I feel wonderful. My spouse anxiously registers everything I eat and nibble. It irritates me. A few steps down the street, we enter a coffee house. My hand is reaching for pastries. My wife's hand reaches between. Through the window, I see my bank. Damn. If I choose, I could buy all the pastry I wanted, including the whole store. The creamy pastry slips from the foil like a mermaid. I take a bite. From now on, it will be more difficult to put me under stress." Like a mermaid, the pastry that eases his stress. This man is writing about a pastry the way most people write about a love affair. And he never talked about food this way. His family was struck by his eating passion. Every conversation circled back to food. He grasped every occasion to dine out, and even though he went back to business, went back to tennis, the people around him could still tell he was way less engaged with all of it. The thing that had his full attention now was food. Quality over quantity, always. Two men, different ages, different careers, different lives, same legions, and same impossible pivot, right? And then there's the child, a 10-year-old boy. He had pharmacoresistant epilepsy, seizures that don't respond to medication. It was caused by a lesion in his right hemisphere, and alongside the seizure onset, something else appeared. The boy, who had no history of eating disorders, no psychiatric issues, no particular relationship with food at all, developed an intense preoccupation with preparing and eating fine quality meals. He's 10. He hadn't read it in a magazine or watched a cooking show and became inspired. A part of his brain was damaged, and the fixation that looked identical to what happened to the journalist and the businessman appeared in a child who had recently had no yearning for fine dining. Up until now, you could tell yourself a comfortable version of this, right? Maybe these people always had some talent, love of food, and the stroke just unlocked it. It freed them from their inhibition, and it let them be who they really were. That's comforting, and it's not entirely crazy either, right? People do sometimes reprioritize after a health scare, but that story doesn't survive the data. It doesn't explain the businessman who couldn't stop reaching for the pastry, and it doesn't explain a 10-year-old boy with zero food history suddenly obsessing over gourmet preparation. Something else was definitely going on. So what's actually going on in that part of the brain? Basically, the right anterior hemisphere, the area where all the lesions were clustering, handles two things that matter here. One, it helps decide what feels rewarding: taste, smell, pleasure, how good something feels, and whether you should seek more of it. And two, it helps you stop. It's the part that says, yeah, that's nice, but we've got other things to care about right now. When damage hits that area, those two systems can fall out of balance, and one specific type of reward can get stuck in the on position. For these 36 patients, the reward got stuck wasn't junk food, it wasn't sugar, it was quality, it was craft, it was fine dining. Like someone flipped a switch, then it couldn't be flipped back. Now, the researchers were careful about this. They weren't claiming that they found a fine dining module hidden in the brain. They weren't saying every right hemisphere stroke is turning someone into a foodie. They were just saying, here's a pattern and a location, so here's a working hypothesis for why the damage in this specific area might produce this specific compulsion. These people didn't discover a hidden passion. It's almost like something was installed by the damage, by accident, by a blood vessel that failed in precisely the wrong place. Or, depending on how you look at it, precisely the right one. So let's take a step back and see what we got here. A 48-year-old man wakes up from a stroke and walks away from his entire career to write about food. A 55-year-old man who lived for tennis is writing about pastries like it's a love affair. And a 10-year-old boy with no food history whatsoever starts obsessing over gourmet cooking. And 36 patients, 34 with damage in the same neighborhood of the brain. But the biggest question I can't stop thinking about is, do you think they're happy? They have this new passion and they're enjoying it so much, right? Because not one of these people chose this. Not one of them woke up and decided, I think I'm gonna care about food now. It just kind of happened to them. Something broke in a very specific part of their brain. And on the other side of that break was a passion that feels completely real. So if they didn't choose it, but they love it, what exactly is it? We throw around the word choice pretty loosely, right? We say things like, I decided to change careers, or I finally found my real passion, or even after my health scare, I finally figured out what really matters. And those statements are true and they feel like they belong to us. But what happened to these patients wasn't a decision. A spontaneous blood vessel broke, and the brain tissue became damaged. And now, their internal machinery that decides what feels important to them was physically altered. The journalist didn't sit in the hospital bed and think, well, life's short, I should follow my heart and write about food. That's the movie version. The real version is that his brain's reward system was disrupted in a way that made fine food feel compelling. The compulsion came from where that damage landed. And when we think about brain damage, we think about loss, right? Like if someone has a stroke and they lose the ability to speak or to move their left hand or to recognize faces, that's tragic. But it makes sense, right? We understand the subtraction. Gourmand syndrome isn't a subtraction, it's an addition. These patients didn't lose anything. They gained something. They gained a passion, a drive, a whole new organizing principle for their lives that, from the inside, felt as real and as theirs as anything they'd ever experienced. The journalist didn't feel like a man living with a neurological side effect. He felt like a man who finally found his calling. And that's kind of creepy, right? Because think about it. If the passion felt artificial, this would be easier to deal with. If these patients woke up and said, something is wrong with me, I can't stop thinking about food, and I don't want to be thinking about food, please help me. That fits neatly in a clinical box, right? It's compulsive behavior. We must treat this patient and the compulsion. But that's not what happened. What happened is the journalist sat down, wrote about food with genuine joy. He built a whole new career around it, and by all accounts, thrived. It didn't feel foreign to him. It felt like a purpose, and these researchers themselves described the syndrome as benign. It presented a positive life change. A man who finally found the thing he was meant to do. Except the thing he was meant to do was determined by which blood vessel happened to rupture. Millimeters of anatomy. That's all the distance was between a man who cared about Swiss trade policy and a man who cared about the texture of bread. Think about that. The things you love, the things that get you out of bed in the morning, the pursuits that feel so deeply, so essentially yours that you can't imagine being the person who doesn't care about them. But what if those things aren't actually yours? What if they're just architecture, neural pathways that happen to be intact, reward systems that happen to be calibrated in a certain way, a balance that could have been different and would have been different if one vessel had failed, or a lesion had landed 2 centimeters to the left. The real question is about whether the things that feel most like you, your passions, your drives, the quiet convictions that shape the whole arc of your life are things you actually chose, or things your hardware assigned to you. Call it the omakase of life, right? If you're sitting with that right now and thinking, okay, at least once it's there, it's real. Even if it came from the damage, that man still loves food, and that love is genuine. I thought so too. But I have one last story for you. Now, this wasn't part of the original Gourmand syndrome study. Different patient, different doctors, different circumstances. But the damage was the same in the right hemisphere. Food obsession out of nowhere. And the reason this case matters, the reason I saved it for last, is because it answers the one question the journalist's story can't. So what happens when you take it away? So here's a man. Somewhere in midlife, he develops this overwhelming passion for fine dining. And when I say overwhelming, I don't mean he starts buying nicer olive oil and watching cooking shows. I mean, his entire life restructures around food. He's traveling long distances across cities, across borders, not for work, not for family, specifically to eat at famous restaurants. His doctors actually have a name for it. Gastronomadism. It's like a food nomad, wandering from meal to meal. Eventually, they get him into a hospital and they do some imaging, and they find focal damage in his right hemisphere. A tumor is pressing inward against his right temporal lobe. Same side of the brain, same impossible pivot. They consult with the patient and make a decision. The doctors surgically remove the tumor. And I bet you think at this point, okay, the tumor was causing his obsession, so obviously if you remove the tumor, you remove the obsession. But the obsession doesn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. With the medical crisis behind him, the man leans all the way into his identity his brain had built for him. He starts writing about food professionally. He becomes a published critic, someone whose opinions on a meal actually carried weight. People decided where to eat based on what this man wrote. And if you would have met this man during his stretch of life, sitting across from that table in some celebrated restaurant somewhere in Europe, watching him close his eyes and taste something and then reach for his notebook, you wouldn't have thought that this man had a neurological condition. You would have thought this man loves what he does. And you might have been a little envious too. Maybe this guy gets to eat at incredible places, incredible food, and tell people all about it. That's the dream, right? The love was real. The expertise was real. The joy was real. Whatever had been rearranged in his brain, the life he built from it was genuine. Every review, every meal, every mile traveled, that was him. At least that's what it felt like from the inside, where it mattered. This wasn't a condition. This was just who he was. Doesn't that sound familiar? Years after the initial surgery, the doctors determined that residual tissue from the tumor needed to be addressed. So they did radiosurgery, radiotherapy. It was targeted. It was precisely aimed at the remaining material near his right temporal lobe, and the treatment was a complete success. But now, about a month later, something started to happen. The passion started to fade. There wasn't a moment where he sat up in bed and thought, "What have I been doing with my life?" That urgency just softened, the cravings loosened, and that thing that pulled him across countries to sit in front of the right plate, that filled his notebooks, that given him a career and a reputation and a reason to get up in the morning, that didn't matter anymore. The drive to write about food diminished. The voice in his head that had been saying for years, "This is what you care about. This is who you are. This is the most important thing," went quiet. The man didn't lose a hobby. He didn't get bored. What drained out of him was the thing he had built an entire identity around. The published reviews, the thousands of miles chasing the perfect meal, the person he had become was dissolving because targeted radiation reduced the pressure on a specific cluster of tissue in the right side of his brain. The tumor presses on the right spot and the passion is born. The treatment relieves the pressure, and the passion quietly bleeds away. Every person we talked about before the story was almost tangible, like something you could hold on to. Like you could tell yourself that even if the journalist's love of food came from a stroke, it was still real. It was still his, right? Like he built on it. He lived in it. He made it his own. Who cares where it started, right? The experience felt genuine. This case doesn't let you keep that. If a passion can be uninstalled, not by some natural fading of interest over time, but by a medical procedure that changes the physical pressure on a few cubic centimeters of brain tissue, then what was it? Was it him? Was it ever him? Or was it just a signal, a pattern of electrical chemical activity that felt like identity, but was really the consequence of where the damage had happened? And if it was, is that all any of us really are? And get this, he didn't lose his memory of any of it. He could still remember the restaurants, the reviews, the countries, the countless miles traveled. All of it was still there. He just didn't feel it anymore. The memories were there, but the wanting was gone, like reading your own diary from a life that happened to someone else. These stories make me ask a question. How much of what I love is actually mine? Not what shaped my taste, right? We all accept that environment and upbringing play a role. That's nurture. That's the story you tell at a dinner party. "Oh, that's my mom. She's a great cook. That's where I get it from." This is different. This political journalist was someone who had zero interest in food, suffered damage to a specific piece of his brain, and woke up to an insatiable passion so consuming he rebuilt his entire life around it. And the other is about a man whose damage was treated, and that passion the tumor quietly built was packed in a doggy bag and left at the restaurant. The last story is very interesting to me. Do you think he was upset about it? Do you think he mourned it? Like, did he sit around missing the restaurants and the notebooks and the life that he built? I don't know. That's the most disturbing part to me. Because let's just say he had been heartbroken. If he'd been devastated about losing this thing that defined his life, at least that would mean he was still in there somewhere, maybe even fighting for it. that there was a him underneath the condition who remembered what it felt like and wanted it back. I'm not sure if that happened. The passion, the identity, the investment in that identity, and the ability to miss it was gone. All of it lived in the same few cubic centimeters of tissue. All of it came and went together. And the journalist is probably still writing about food, still loving it, and still living inside that identity that showed up in a hospital room in 1997. And he has no way of knowing whether that love is something he owns or if it's something that just happened to him. What do you think? Leave it down in the comments. Thanks for being here for this video. If you want to hear more of history's mysteries or life's disturbing discoveries, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. You got anything you want to share? Leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, bye.